maintain this. It's all about power and who has power and who wants to maintain power. Look around this room and see who's in this room, right? When I went to college, one thing I remembered when we read Du Bois was when we were learning about the talented 10th, my professor said, you know, women are the talented 10th, right? Women make up the talented 10th now, and he's talking specifically about black women. And so, you know, when you look around and you look at the proportion of black women to black men in college, you know, that sometimes we can think about that and go, okay, we're making progress. But then you think about the proportion of black women in college to the proportion of you know, black women coming up, right? Of black girls coming up. So we might be proportionate to our own community, but to the rest of the country, we're still such a small minority. And a lot of that has to do with the ways in which we've been, you know, again, socialized, and the ways in which we've been treated. So I think it's really important, and I think this is what you all were talking about, is really important to understand that there's a longer history of this kind of treatment, that there's a longer history of these kinds of relationships of power to those who don't have power, and of stereotyping of black people, but particularly of black girls. There are a lot more, you know, stereotypes, and it gets a lot more complex when we're looking at black girls and black women, which might be unfortunate compared to black men, right? They only fit into a few categories of stereotypes. But they're all damaging at the end of the day. They're all extremely damaging. And I think that, you know, when we, I hate to do what I want to do, but when we look at our current situation and the current climate that we're in, you know, and we think about the fact that we have a person in the Oval Office,
45, just say 45.
45, who maintains and continues to perpetuate these very stereotypes, right? And I mean, just like over the weekend, not like 20 years ago, like Saturday, right? Probably today, but I haven't been on the news. And so this is a problem. This is the same person, and I've said this before, who challenged, right, the transcripts or the validity of transcripts of the former president, right? And so this is just a snapshot. This isn't about black girls necessarily, but imagine then if you start to build that hierarchy on race and on gender, where do black girls fall and where do black women fall? And where have we always, you know, fallen? Where have we been? So it's really, really important to keep that in mind. And it's also important for those of you who are going on to be teachers and educators and even administrators to understand that when people raise these issues, it's not coming out of nowhere. Right? It's not coming out of nowhere. These women have on their #BlackAtLMU t-shirts. That didn't just happen because they got upset about something. It's years and years and years of falling into this cycle of degradation, of stereotyping, which is also, you know, degrading, of a whole bunch of things that we have to be willing to kind of face, we have to own. Right? And we have to be willing to then make changes and to consciously make changes. We can't just say, well, I tried and that's it. No, you have to work at this. And it's not easy, and it's not going to be easy, and I'm done.
Thank you so much, Dr. Campbell. Your questions, please.
We still only have one mic. Hi, thanks for the opportunity for both of you. Speaking of the socialization piece that you were just speaking of, when you looked at your data, you look at then the way in which black girls were assigned adultified perceptions in school, most teachers were women, correct? So did you all look at the factors, whether they were white women or black women, that they saw girls in that way? The other piece of that was just looking at the therapeutic needs of Black girls in terms of hundreds of years of the trauma of rape and violence, and that not being addressed.
So with our study, we didn't just, and if I said this, I apologize, or even sort of set this assumption, so we didn't just look at schools. So we looked across public systems and sort of suggested that this is one reason that we see this level of disproportionality, and in particular these experiences. But then in terms of all of our survey respondents, we didn't ask them their occupation. So we were just looking across level of education, race, gender, location in the country, etc.
How did you recruit your adults?
We used a whole company to do that. So we wanted that separation. So we used a national survey company who would do that for us, and then would recruit in that way. So that again, there was we wanted to avoid any sense of this touch point to where there would be a question about the validity of the results. But what that question raises is where we're sort of thinking about the next step of adultification actually, and we are thinking about how we can field this with teachers. But what I will say is because we got so much attention about the report, we're having to be really conscious about if we ask similar questions, are we going to get a bias in our response now? Where people are like, no, I don't have that viewpoint. No, all kids get the same amount of nurturing. So we're having to be really thoughtful about now this being done at a very local level, as opposed to it being a national survey, or thinking about how we're partnering with different organizations, both locally and nationally, to really advance this with teachers in particular. And I apologize. The second part of your question was thinking about the traumagenic effects of this from a historical perspective. I think that's very much part of what the discourse needs to be. That it's not just that there's stereotypes and bias and assumptions that are built into it. Why do we think that there's a hypersexualization? Well, because women's bodies are being exploited at rates that we can't even begin to comprehend, right? Because we were using women's bodies not just to bear children, but to then care for children, right? Wet nurses. I mean, all of these sort of different ways that we looked at marginalizing and nominalizing what it was to be a woman, and then also placing a price around that and a value that was associated with it as being a piece of property.
And sometimes they were a Mammy and a Jezebel and a Sapphire
all at the same time. Yeah. Exactly, and that was the role that women were expected to play because of that sense of ownership. And it was easy because in that historical context, I owned your body, so you didn't have a right to be able to say that none of that was normatively acceptable. And then I think, again, during the civil rights, in the pre-civil rights era, Jim Crow laws were absolutely institutionalizing that. And that was an acceptable form of violence to perpetuate against women's bodies, and in particular Black women's bodies in that way. So.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Vandalina. So when I was discussing with Dr. Martin about the statistics that you had brought up about when Dr. Campbell asked you why Black girls, and you brought up in juvenile systems, Black women are incarcerated at 700% higher within the last decade.
Yep.
Yes. So my question is, does that statistic include trans people as well, or is it just cisgendered Black women?
It is just cisgendered Black women.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Harlan, and I was just having the talking turn with Professor Ugar and Danielle, who had to step out due to parking. But we were talking about how important it is to start at the community level. So as far as Danielle and I are both African American, and so we were talking about how do we feel about this when it comes to the Black community. And I know that you all did a national survey, but we were just giving our experiences, and they were different. And she was saying, my mom has always treated me as if, she was her age. And I was just kind of when we think about in the Black community, how do we treat each other, and how do we treat Black girls? And I don't know if, your research is ongoing, or you're going to be, doing research within the Black community.